Welcome, everybody, into the Super Wild Card Weekend Recap. We're here to break down all the games, discuss the legacies of these quarterbacks who have both moved on and failed in this round of the playoffs. We're also here to talk about the hirings and firings of the coaches in the head coaching carousel that is the NFL offseason. We're also going to be here to talk about the worst top five, the moment you've all been waiting for at the end of the show. And best of all, latest news from the coaching carousel here. Mike Vrabel is now the official head coach of the New England Patriots. We predicted this on the show a few weeks back, and now it has come into fruition. Head coach of the Patriots, Mike Vrabel. How does that sound?
It sounds really good, and I like the idea of Mike Vrabel being the New England Patriots head coach. My only question is, why didn't you do this last year? Because if I'm not mistaken, he was available last year. You had Gerard Mayo on your staff, and you already had concerns about him being a head coach. Maybe you didn't think he was quite ready yet, but somehow you're convinced by Bill Belichick on his way out. Like, with this, if I'm fired, you must hire Gerard Mayo and then put off a year of success with Mike Vrabel not there. And it feels like you just wasted an entire year, but kudos to the Patriots for actually figuring out, okay, we did make the wrong decision here, firing their head coach, and now you made it right, and you have Mike Vrabel here. So I definitely think he is the right fit for New England. He understands the organization. I'm pretty sure everyone, when he gave his Hall of Fame speech for the Patriots, when he was being inducted to the Patriots Hall of Fame, was like, oh yeah, this guy feels like he's going to be here next year coaching this football team. And Robert Kraft, the way he was acting, a lot of people just on New England radio and watch that's like, Gerard Mayo, if he gets fired this year, looks like Mike Vrabel's definitely coming back. And he fits the culture where he has a defensive mentality. However, he's a hard-nosed head coach, but unlike Bill Belichick, he's out there putting in work. And if you want to get hyped up, you want to feel younger. If you're an older gentleman watching this show or older lady watching this show, just watch Mike Vrabel out there hitting pads with linebackers and tight ends. Like, that's the intensity that this team is going to need. Justin Drake May is going to need someone like Mike Vrabel on this team to help guide him along, and then he'll also be able to help prioritize offense because he drafted someone like AJ Brown. He was able to bring someone like Derrick Henry into the fold on that team, and he made someone like Ryan Tannehill look successful. He knows what he's doing as far as it comes to picking coordinators, from offensive coordinators to defensive coordinators. He is a leader of men, which will help in this locker room, which was severely lacking with Gerard Mayo. And no, it was not a race issue like people like Stephen A. Smith or Shannon Sharp would say on ESPN. As Antonio Brown said, like, he just lost the locker room, and that's why he got fired. And it gave me hope when Robert Kraft went out there and fired him. It's like, I feel like if Kraft goes out here and keeps him for another year, I'm going to be concerned. But the fact that he immediately pivoted to Mike Vrabel, like, okay, guy actually still cares about his team and winning.
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is a great hire for a lot of reasons. First of all, like the certain teams like the Patriots, the Steelers, and there's like a few other examples I could think of where there's just a certain culture that's been engraved in this team, especially with having Belichick for 25 years. Like, there's a certain Patriots way, and I feel like Mike Vrabel has that Patriots way. He was a part of the early Super Bowls. He's a Hall of Famer for both the Patriots and I believe in the NFL as well. One of the best linebackers of my time, like watching him play when I was younger. But he also, unlike with some of the other hires they could have gone with, or with Gerard Mayo, what they had last year, he actually knows the offense, turning Ryan Tannehill into what he was, which was a Pro Bowler who beat Tom Brady and brought them to the AFC title game against the Chiefs, like completely overachieved with the team that they had. Always had a tough defensive team, was able to draft very well, and brought them to their promised land there. And now here, like, if he can instill that offensive mindset with the Patriots where maybe they can draft a good running back like a Cam Scatabo, or they can go after, I doubt they'll get Ashton Ginty, but if they wanted to, they can get someone like him, have a good running game that can take the pressure off of Drake May, and, reestablish that offensive line. The defense, I feel like, is going to be fine. They still have defensive players there. Looks like he's interested in bringing on Robert Saleh as the defensive coordinator. So if all of these fall into line, then I do think we'll see the Patriots back in the playoffs probably within the next 2 or 3 years. But, there's still the Bills in the way, and we'll see what happens with the Dolphins. But great hire, great direction for him. And I think it also shows that Robert Kraft is still a good owner. Just how will this completely how will it work? Because there's the other side of it where if their offense still sucks, it's the same old Patriots. So they got to reinvent themselves while also staying true to themselves.
Yeah, and I think they will. However, even if it does take a year or two to recoup the offense, I think just Mike Vrabel there gives stability to the locker room where you have a leader there as a head coach, and he's someone who commands respect, especially if you bring in someone like Robert Saleh, who has been a head coach, and you faced him head to head in your division, and you're like, damn, maybe it didn't work out for him with the New York Jets, but he for damn sure knows how to coach defense in San Francisco. And the Jets always had a good defense as far as when Robert Saleh was, and we saw how they fell apart this season without Bob. When Bob left the sideline, the Jets continued to get worse and worse each week, and they weren't in a terrible spot when they fired him. And I do think he is someone who can be a good head coach in the right situation there, but never really just was able to put it together because that's just the franchise that the New York Jets are. But if he's the defensive coordinator, then you're going to have a jacked head coach. You're going to have a jacked defensive coordinator. So now we need to find someone as an offensive coordinator who's like equally imposing, right? Or they're going to be a misfit.
Yeah, clearly. And honestly, like Mike Vrabel was able to get Arthur Smith, and Arthur Smith was successful for them in Tennessee. I feel like he can find another good offensive coordinator, but I feel like the head coaching hire is important, but I feel like the next most important hire for the Patriots is offensive coordinator. You've had defensive coordinators there. You've had old quarterbacks take over as the offensive coordinator. Like, get an offensive coordinator that's proven and that can help Drake May become the best version of himself. That's going to be ultimately the success. Patriots have had the most abysmal, horrible, eye-gougingly terrible offense for the last 5 years. We can even include the Cam Newton era if we want to. Offense that's just boring and plain with screens and bad offensive lines. They need to get an offensive coordinator. It's almost more important than their head coaching hire, honest to God. And hopefully they can do it. I think Mike Vrabel knows enough people that he can do it, but that's the most important thing if the Patriots are going to be good again.
Yeah, no, it's definitely that. And I feel like that just hard nosed identity is something he'll bring, which is going to be also run the football. And what gives me hope is Mike Vrabel understands it's important to take pressure off your quarterback and running the football. And it's easier said than done when you have Derrick Henry on your team. He still tried to do that. When he's had other running backs outside of Derrick Henry, they had DeMarco Murray in Tennessee there. So in New England, I feel like they will try and go out there, establish a run game, and then he understands you have to build the team from the inside out. So that's offensive line and then also running and then just taking pressure off of your quarterback that way, just so Drake May isn't getting murdered on every single play like he was last season. And I think another thing is defensive players now are going to want to come back to New England, where now you already have someone who's a really quality veteran like Jeffrey Simmons liking the idea on social media. He's like, I would be open to going to New England. And then you've had some issues stopping the run and with your interior line. Like, he's the perfect head coach to go up against someone like a Sean McDermott. And I feel like the Patriots will be better than Miami and New York next year.
Yeah, I can agree. I mean, Drake May takes the next step. The thing is, they also have $130 million in cap space, which that can get you not one, but two great receivers. That can get you some offensive line help, and that can also get you someone like a Jeffrey Simmons who's interested in joining you, maybe at a discount. They can essentially replace Matthew Judon with a Jeffrey Simmons who's a little bit younger. So I like it a lot. I think the Patriots are definitely trending upwards. And especially with where the Dolphins are currently with their team, Tyreek Hill might be out, and the Jets just always being perpetual Mets. Patriots are in a good spot. But
Did Baltimore sign Derrick Henry to a 1 or a 2 year deal?
I believe it's a 1 year deal.
Okay. There you go.
Interesting. Speaking of head coaching carousels here, though, Mike McCarthy, a guy that we had spoken about them firing last year, wasn't fired, was let go, did not re sign with the Dallas Cowboys. So the Dallas Cowboy position is now open. We talked about it briefly on the show last week because we suspected he wasn't going anywhere. Well, Big Mike still got plenty of suitors. The Jets, the Saints, and the Bears are all interested in Big Mike returning next year. in getting his revenge against these Cowboys. Mike McCarthy, of these three teams, in my humble abode, which team makes the most sense for him? The Jets. The Jets make the most sense, but not for the reason you'd think. The Jets just moved on from Robert Saleh, who's a younger head coach, defensive minded, and get Mike McCarthy, who still runs his offense like it's 2005. I feel like it'll be them. But honestly, though, most likely it's probably going to be the Bears. The Bears are probably going to hire Mike McCarthy. So we should prepare for that reality. That's probably what's going to happen. I would actually put money on it. He's probably going to be a
Yeah.
Chicago Bear.
Honestly, yeah, the Bears make sense to me with Chicago because, like, oh, we saw him have success in our division because, we saw him routinely kick our ass up and down the curb every single time we played there. If you're the Chicago Bears, so that makes sense. You just get a safe vanilla hire that's going to be a bad hire for your team. It's not as terrible as Frank Reich, I guess, but it's not as good if you went out there and actually knew how to interview people, which the Chicago Bears just don't know how to do at this point. But if you're New York and you're someone where you have some ill will towards Aaron Rodgers, where you're like, well, maybe we don't like how it panned out with Aaron Rodgers this year and we want to move on from him and Devontae Adams, it's like, all right, let me go ahead to piss off Aaron Rodgers. And if I want to be petty, I'm going to go out there and hire your ex that you ran out of Green Bay. I'm going to run you out of town. And then I'm going to bring back your ex head coach that you so desperately needed out of Green Bay because he was holding you back. And maybe his time had passed there, but just as a petty jab to Aaron Rodgers, can I see the Jets making a terrible mistake out of pettiness? Yes, I can. So I feel like that would be the argument for Mike McCarthy with the Jets. Not football reasons, but Aaron Rodgers, you pissed me off. Now I'm gonna go out there and hire Mike McCarthy.
Is it nuts to say that? For any other team, it's nuts to say that. But this is the same team that did not trade for Jerry Jeudy, Pro Bowl wide receiver, by the way, because of his Madden ratings. Okay. So the Jets of all teams, for us to say that we're bullying them, we're not. This is the New York Jets, the most dysfunctional franchise in all of sports, now has the longest playoff drought in all of the NFL. So the Jets would absolutely do that. 100%. I see
Maybe
the whole
maybe the Jets just watched the wrong episode of the Brickyard and they watched the episode where you're like Jerry Judy, more like Jerry Booty. He's a terrible receiver. He's not a number two. Maybe he was watching they were watching all of that and like, okay, maybe we didn't see the reformed Brick after that episode to go out there and trade for Jerry Judy. So we're gonna look at his Madden ratings. Brick talks about Madden. He also talks about Jerry Judy not being a number two. Why would we want him on our team? Let's let him go to Cleveland.
Well, there's no document that that conversation occurred. So, no, honestly, I mean, Jerry Judy, I stand by my Jerry Judy takes. However, the fact that they didn't trade him because of his Madden ratings is Jets as it possibly gets in my mind. And although I am also a Jerry Judy hater, and I honestly say it proudly, the Jets still made a mistake there with not trading for Mr. Jerry Booty himself. But so Mike McCarthy is no longer the head coach of the Cowboys, which we said was a year too early after he embarrassed himself against the Green Bay Packers last year as the overwhelming favorite. Well, now the Cowboys' position's available. And right now, Deion Sanders is tied to it, just like we had predicted about a year ago with Deion. But here we are now. He talked to Jerry Jones. Chances are we'll see how this plays out. Will they sign with him? Will they not? But Deion to Dallas. Do you see this working or do you see this being a complete meltdown?
This seems like a complete mess, and it seems like excellent television. I mean, he's going from a team in Boulder, Colorado, where he's a great recruiter. He's a player's head coach, but like, how great of an actual like down to the X's and O's coach is Deion Sanders. Like college, it can skew it a little bit because we've seen people have dominant teams be really good in college football solely because they're a good recruiter. They have good social skills, like Urban Meyer. Urban Meyer was, I'm not saying Deion Sanders is Urban Meyer, but we've seen someone be a really good recruiter, great at talking to parents, and put together great teams and then end up thriving in college and then it not really translating to the NFL. So I feel like Deion Sanders, does he have the potential to be a good head coach? Yeah, but does he want to be a head coach in the NFL if he doesn't have Shador and his other son on the team? No. So then if you're Dallas, you have to figure out a way to get Shador Sanders. And a lot of people are going to be like, well, trade Dak Prescott to Tennessee. No, if you're Tennessee, you're trying to rebuild right now. You want to find your next guy at quarterback. Why would I go out there and pay for Dak Prescott, the most overpaid quarterback in NFL history? God bless him for getting his money, but he's overpaid for his production here. And then you're going to be like, I have the number one pick and I can pick any quarterback in the draft. If you're Tennessee, even if I don't think Shador is going to be as good as Dak Prescott, I think he could be a little bit better. Maybe he's like a little bit worse than Jaden Daniels, but he's kind of that prototype of quarterback. If I even think he's going to be slightly worse and not a bust, I'm going to take the quarterback that I don't have to pay for another 3 years and is not going to be on my books for another 4 years. Like, why would I trade for Dak Prescott if I'm one of these teams just to let the Cowboys live in their fairy tale dream? Like, this is delusional. And could it happen? Yeah. But if the Tennessee Titans do that trade, it would be one of the dumbest trades in NFL history.
Yeah, it would be dumb. You know what this kind of reminds me of? So I think, first of all, I think Deion Sanders is a good coach. But like you mentioned here, like he's a great recruiter because anybody who loves football sees Deion Sanders as a 18-year-old and says, I want to play for his team. And I think that's part of the reason why they've been so successful. Also, having Shador Sanders and Travis Hunter hasn't hurt them either. However, as it translates to the NFL, would he be a head coach? I think there's a lot more question marks than there are answers there. To me, as much as I'd love to see this on television because it'd be interesting to see, does this not remind you of the Magic Johnson Lakers GM era? Because to me, it kind of does. You have a all-time great player of that franchise who played for you decades ago. You hire him because you're in the worst part of your era, I don't know, in the last couple of years. I know that they were just good last year, but you get the idea. They've been trailing in the mud the last 30 years. They haven't been relevant pretty much since Deion Sanders played there. And so rather than changing your identity or, I don't know, just changing your ways, maybe reasserting what we've been doing the last decade, instead we're going to go after Deion because Deion's going to fix all our problems. Even though our offense is going to get worse, even though our defense, we have players who could be gone this year, we're going to go for Deion and everything's going to be fine. It sounds like it's delusion land. And I also think that Deion, as much as I like him as a head coach, I don't think he would translate as well to the NFL. Simply for the fact that all these other guys you're playing with, you know, maybe Micah Parsons is shell-shocked, but these veterans of the league, are they going to care that Deion Sanders is their head coach? Maybe in week 1, but when it gets to week 15 and they're vying for a playoff spot, they don't give a shit who their head coach is. They just want him to be a good head coach. So I honestly don't think it would work very well for a number
Yeah.
of reasons.
Yeah, and it depends because Deion Sanders, like, it depend, like, you know, how he picks coordinators, and we really don't know, like, how good of an NFL head coach. Like, one thing we do know, he'll be good at, like, getting people to want to play for the Cowboys. He's going to sell tickets there, which is the most important thing for Jerry Jones. And he's a motivator, and, like, he is a good father figure, especially college, and I feel like he just fits the vibe of college football better. And I love Deion Sanders as the coach of the Colorado Buffaloes there. So I like, you know, everything he's done for college football, how he's been able to coach his sons who are top picks in the draft. Like, I feel like all of that's great, but I feel like where the media starts to get delusional is I saw, like, I forget who put this out there. I don't think it was Skip Bayless, but they're like, if anyone can go to Jerry Jones' office and say, we've tried it your way, Jerry, let's try it my way, it would be Deion Sanders. Like, really? Really? This is where the delusion sets in. A guy who's closer to dead than not, and he's out here, and he hasn't won since his team has been on VHS tapes. That's how long it's been since the Cowboys has been successful. The Texans almost have double their playoff wins in the 2000s now than the Dallas Cowboys. They have more playoff success and more team success than the Dallas Cowboys do. This is the person who kept Jason Garrett and hired Mike McCarthy. You really think he wants someone on his team who can outshine him, and then someone who's also going to ask for more power and ask to do it their way, when he said there's no one else who's going to be the GM because I'm the owner of my football team, so I'm not going to give up that power? Like, no. Like, if you think realistically that Jerry Jones would suddenly change his ways. Like, the older you get, like, yeah, it's definitely the softer you get, and you don't get more stuck in your ways and more stubborn at all. Like, no, that's definitely not how aging works. So, like, yeah, big brain, big brain. Like, people who think that Deion Sanders could go, like, oh, let's try it my way, like, no. And Troy Aikman, there was a report of the coordinators that the Dallas Cowboys were looking at hiring. One of them was the sad Affleck himself, Kellen Moore. And then Troy Aikman goes out there and he's like, it doesn't matter who the Dallas Cowboys hire because he'll never fully be allowed to coach the team. He's like, I played for this team for 12 years. I respect the hell out of them. I like this franchise and I root for them. He's like, but good luck if you want to go there and be a head coach. And Troy Aikman rarely comes down from the booth. You rarely see him on another show. Like he does his, you know, quarterly, bi-yearly visits to the herd every once in a while with Colin, chops it up on a couple podcasts once in a while, but you rarely see Troy Aikman come down to the booth, and he came down to the booth because he's upset about how the Dallas Cowboys have been run, and Dallas Cowboys fans are sick of it, and he just comes out there and goes on a rant, and he's like, no, like, even if it's Kellen Moore, doesn't matter. If it's Aaron Glenn, good luck to you. But you're not actually going to be able to coach the team and put your own imprint. So after seeing that, like behind closed doors, Troy Aikman's probably like Deion Sanders, like, hey man, if you actually want to be a coach in the NFL, this may be career suicide. And then also, if you're Deion Sanders and Tennessee's like, well, we'll fire our coordinator and you can come to Nashville, like maybe he would prefer to be in Tennessee than Dallas. Dallas isn't for everyone.
Yeah, I think what Troy Aikman said about the fact that you don't actually coach the Cowboys. Coaching the Cowboys is basically like driving with safety wheels on, because at the end of the day, it's all going to be Jerry Jones' decision. You might have your stance on like game plan, but overall, when it comes to making big decisions, thinking that, Deion Sanders has an edge because he's been in college football the last 3 years. He's watched as the Buffaloes have gotten better and better and turned around the franchise. You would think that he would listen to him, but at the end of the day, it's going to come down to who's the flashiest name. Can we get Ashton Jeanty on our team? Can we get the Quinn Ewers of the world, whoever it might be, the biggest stars of college football? Can we get them to Dallas? That's what Jerry Jones cares about at the end of the day. The playoff success, the fact that they were negotiating with Mike McCarthy after they went 7-10, and they had the biggest meltdown in the playoffs last year, going 13-4, and then crumbling to the Packers the way they did against your former team. They proved to me that they don't care about winning the Super Bowl at this point. Unlike these other teams, we're going to talk about in a few minutes about how they've performed in the playoffs. No, the Cowboys don't care. They care about namesake. So Deion's a flashy name, so they're going to try to get Deion on that team. If they don't get Deion, who else is going to be a Cowboys head coach at this point?
Kellen Moore.
Kellen Moore.
Yeah.
Kellen Moore would be their head coach.
Yeah, of course. He's easily manipulated. The Philadelphia Eagles have had a good year offensively. People could say that Kellen Moore's were for him because the big criticism from Kellen Moore, outside of looking like a sad version of Ben and Casey Affleck, is just not being creative and then passing the ball when he should be running it. And, he's kind of fixed that a little bit in Philadelphia this year because it's hard not to give the ball to Saquon Barkley. But the real criticism for Kellen Moore is people are like, why are you throwing the ball, man, right now when we could just run it, pick up a first down, and then the game is over? But then you just threw us out of a game versus Jacksonville where we were up 3 touchdowns. You just lost us a game versus Miami. Like, you can go down all the one possession games that Kellen Moore lost for the Cowboys, but Jerry Jones will look at what he did with Philadelphia. This guy's been mentioned as far as names for head coaches so far. Can you really blame him for the Chargers last year when it was all Brandon Staley's fault? Brandon Staley's a monster, and now he goes under Nick Sirianni, who just led the Philadelphia Eagles to the conference championship, and they lost to the Lions by a field goal, but they put up a lot of points. Like, it's Kellen Moore. It has to be. Let's go young.
That makes me gag, to be honest with you. And Kellen Moore, respect to him if he can get a head coaching job, because I don't think any other team is really going to make him a head coach this year. I don't think he's proven enough. But if he does, congratulations to him. But for the Cowboys, good luck for the next 5 years as you have Kellen Moore and you guys get nowhere in the playoffs while you have the Commanders, who just won a playoff game we'll go over later, and the Eagles, who just won a playoff game, they're going places, and the Giants are going to probably draft a quarterback this year. So you guys are looking at a potential where you guys could be the worst team in your division. Maybe not next year because the Giants, they got a long way to go before they're even as bad as the Cowboys. But within the next 3-4 years, they could be the laughing stock of the NFC East, and I would not be surprised in the slightest because of Jerry Jones.
Yeah, no, and they already are. And, if it's not Kellen Moore, why not Matt Nagy?
Yeah, I would take Matt Nagy over Kellen Moore. At least Matt
Yeah,
Nagy, like, he's been exposed to Mahomes. He was relatively successful in Chicago. I know he doesn't look that way now, but he brought Mitch Trubisky to the playoffs. They had a good
hey, you
defense,
should
so
have won a playoff game. They should have beat Philadelphia.
I mean, yeah, the doink. So yeah, I
Yeah.
think Matt Nagy would be better. But last head coaching update is for the Lions, OC and DC. Ben Johnson looking like it's between the Jags and Raiders based on reports. Looks like Tom Brady's been whispering in Ben Johnson's ear a little bit. And then Aaron Glenn looking like he's the favorite to be the head coach of the Saints, which we should know hopefully by next week's episode if that becomes the case. But updates on Ben Johnson and Aaron Glenn.
Yeah, and this gives me a lot of hope because the fact that Aaron Glenn is talking to the Saints and Ben Johnson's going to be talking to the Raiders, at this point, it seems to me that's a great sign that the Lions got the script and they won the Super Bowl this year. So, congrats to the Lions. That's an early sign. Seemed like they just stuck around last year. The NFL's like, hey, last year wasn't your year. We had to get another Super Bowl for Mahomes. We also have to make it a GOAT competition. So you'll go to the Super Bowl this year, and Aiden Hutchinson will make a miraculous return and win it. So I feel like that's a great sign. For Aaron Glenn with the New Orleans Saints, I mean, the Saints aren't the worst franchise in the world. They're not the best, but I do think they will give him a fair shot because every time he's like, how long do you keep Dennis Allen for? Like, really? So you can throw that in your face. So I feel like they will actually commit. They're a bit of a smaller franchise, so they're not really looking to fire a head coach, and no one really cares about the Saints. Like, we're the only team people making fun of Dennis Allen, really. And then it'd just be when they were on national television. That's the only time that people would care about the Saints, but no one really talks about them unless they're in the playoffs. So it's like a pretty low pressure job. And then for the Raiders with Ben Johnson, I worry that Tom Brady is kind of manipulating Ben Johnson to go against his instincts, where instinctually you should be the Raiders are typically a bad franchise, and you still don't know what the Raiders are going to look like with Tom Brady as a minority owner calling the shots, because we have seen another GOAT call the shots before. I believe his name's Michael Jordan. And how has that panned out? I mean, just because Tom Brady's like, "Oh, it's going to be different in Vegas this time," I've convinced Mayock to change his ways, maybe trim his hair so it looks a little bit less scary and he's not scaring my kids when I'm around him. But like, just because Tom Brady's manipulating him, it makes me a little bit worried that Ben Johnson may get himself into a bad situation, that he may instinctually have said like, oh, maybe this isn't the right decision. So I still don't love Ben Johnson with the Raiders. I would prefer to see him go somewhere where he has a quarterback already, or he has at least the top draft pick for quarterback. Where the Raiders, you're not really going to have your first option unless you trade up, and you could potentially trade up with the Patriots with Tom Brady having that connection there. You do me a favor, I'll do you a favor, and we'll give you, maybe we give you some players on defense to help you out, and we get our quarterback, and it works out for both New England and Las Vegas. But I don't know. I just don't fully trust Tom Brady as a owner yet, because I've seen Michael Jordan suck repeatedly, and it took him to get a no-brainer in LaMelo Ball for his franchise to have even a small inkling of being relevant. Like, the only time it happened with the Hornets was Kemba Walker. Like, really? And the relevance was getting swept by Miami in the first round. Oh, congratulations.
Yeah, I'm not as worried that he'll turn into Michael Jordan, but I think that if you're looking at the Raiders situation, you should be concerned because look at another example about Wayne Gretzky for the Coyotes. They went bankrupt. Have you heard of any professional sports team go bankrupt? Because that's what the
Yeah.
Coyotes did with Wayne Gretzky. So the great ones are not always the greatest GMs by any means. But I
Larry
think
Bird was okay. Larry Bird.
Larry Bird, yeah, he's not the greatest of all time though. So, but he was good for the Pacers. But I will say with Ben Johnson, I think what he's interested with the Raiders with is he'll be the head coach, but he also has the opportunity to oversee a GM. You guys can have the same mindset, and they could really build like kind of similar to like how they had Ben Holmes and Dan Campbell. They hire them both together as a
Brad,
package
yeah.
deal, and they both are on the same mindset. I think that's what attracts Ben Johnson. Honestly, though, if I'm looking at the other opportunities, like I know the Jaguars are super interested in him. That has the parallel. Well, okay, well we have Trevor Lawrence. Maybe you can unlock Trevor Lawrence and what he could be. But at the same time, you have Shad Khan on the other side, who's not a great owner. So I feel like there might be an opportunity where he just ends up staying with the Lions at the end of the day because he doesn't love the Jags and he doesn't love the Raiders. And he just ends up staying there because this is a good organization and he's been successful with the Lions. I think that's a real possibility, potentially. If the Raiders one doesn't feel great and neither does the Jags.
Yeah, and it's also not everyone's meant to be a head coach, and there's a lot of pressure being the head coach because Ben Johnson right now is a really good play caller, and it's really hard to be a head coach and run the offense and call plays. I mean, just look at kind of how Kyle Shanahan has aged, and then look at the Adderall in Sean McVay's eyes here. So you do have to put in a lot of work to be a head coach, and maybe like you want to run it back with Detroit. So I feel like if I'm Ben Johnson, I'm looking at Chicago would be my number one spot if they're interested in him because you have Caleb Williams there. We know Caleb Williams can be a good quarterback. And then also Trevor, like I feel like there still is something to unlock there. And he would do it the way he did it with Jared Goff was the run game, where we leaned on David Montgomery, we leaned on Jameer Gibbs, and then he just knows how to kind of unlock a quarterback. It's kind of just been beat around, never really got a fair shot. And then we've seen like that draft with Darnold, Mayfield, like it took them a while to really find their groove in the NFL. So maybe Trevor's like a little bit of the same case there. So it really depends on if you want to try and fix Trevor or you don't necessarily know who your quarterback's going to be with the Raiders.
Yeah, that's true. I guess Trevor Lawrence has the most potential to be unlocked with him, especially because we saw how Jared Goff was at the end with the Rams here. You mentioned the 2018 draft, though. This was a big week for the 2018 draft. We mentioned Josh Allen. He moves on to the second round to face 2018 draft pick Lamar Jackson, 2 MVPs. And then we also got to see Sam Darnold. He got to have his playoff debut. Baker Mayfield, he made another playoff appearance and he had a great game as well. But 2018 draft, when it happened, there's a lot of controversy of was Baker Mayfield the number one overall pick? Was he worthy? And then how this QB class has formed since then, especially this year with the renaissance of Sam Darnold, this draft has become one of the best quarterback classes of all time at this point. And at least in the last decade, it's absolutely the best quarterback class. Baker number one, Sam Darnold at 3, Josh Allen, and then Lamar Jackson. It's shaped up to be pretty excellent. Could be down as like the 2004 QB type draft where all of these guys end up eventually being Pro Bowlers and maybe Hall of Famers.
Yeah, so then if we're repicking the draft, where did Josh Rosen go? Was he number 2 or number 4?
Josh Rosen was the 4th quarterback taken at number 10.
Number 10? Okay, so if we're redoing this draft then, we would have Lamar Jackson in Cleveland.
Yep.
We'd have Josh Allen with the Jets. We'd have
Oh,
Baker Mayfield in Arizona. And then we would have
or
Sam
Buffalo.
Darnold and Sam Darnold.
Yeah, so if we just swap them around, right? Josh Rosen's going to the Ravens. Sorry, Ravens. You're getting Josh Rosen, whether you want him or not. Sam Darnold would probably go to the Cardinals. Honestly, that would change history quite a bit because the following year they drafted Kyler Murray. So Kyler Murray might have never been drafted by the Cardinals in this scenario. And they probably weren't also the worst team in football with Sam Darnold. So that would have been interesting. And then Buffalo would probably have Baker. So he would have still sat behind Tyrod Taylor, ironically enough. And
That's
then
funny.
the thing with Josh Allen is like Josh Allen or the Jets. Nobody survives the Jets. And Josh Allen's great, and I think he's excellent. But the Jets, let's remember what Jets team they were bringing on because this team was terrible. I mean, they were 4-12, right? And let's remember who their receivers were. I'm going to pull up their team real quick, but
The best receiver was Robbie Anderson.
That's right. Yeah, Robbie Chosen Anderson.
Yeah.
What a nightmare that team would have been. So yeah, I think that of anybody whose legacy could have been impacted the hardest, probably is Josh Allen. Nobody survives the Jets. Certain teams are like the black hole of franchises, and the Jets are that team. And it took him a while to get going. It took him, with good coaching and everything else to be what he became, but that would have been a disgrace.
Yeah,
But
no, he
then,
would have been like the Tim Tebow of Jameis Winston's.
yeah. And then so Lamar Jackson as a Cleveland Brown, though, that one's actually super interesting. We could have seen him, because let's remember, they had Odell, Jarvis Landry, Nick Chubb on that team with David Njoku, and the best
Yeah.
offensive line in football. So that team might have won a Super Bowl potentially with that
If
defense
they
too.
if they had Kevin Stefanski, yes. But, would Lamar have played well enough to keep Hugh Jackson, Todd Haley, and Freddie Kitchens together? Is the question, because Lamar is the great eraser. So I feel like with Baltimore, they did a much better job than Cleveland would have, of like as far as containing him. And it took him like, a year to get his passing ability. But Lamar was also a little bit of a project. He was a much faster project than Josh Allen because he had a lot more success earlier in his career and has continued to get better. And he's just overall a more polished quarterback at this point than Josh Allen is. But with the Browns, does that happen if you don't have Jim Harbaugh there and you don't have that stable system? And then on the flip side, it would be, well, he would still have way better weapons than he did in Baltimore because, like, you had Mark Andrews, Hayden Hurst there, and I believe Owen Daniels at one point. You had like three tight ends on that team. Jack Doyle, I believe, was the other tight end. But you didn't really have a running game. It was like J.K. Dobbins. And then you had Hollywood Brown. But if you go the Ravens and then you do have Landry, Odell, Ninjoku, and Chubb, then like, okay, then you do have better weapons. And then it's an aging Ben Roethlisberger in that division. And then Flacco leaving the Ravens, then 2019, the Ravens are probably looking at drafting a quarterback. Then who are they drafting in the next draft? Like, it changes Baltimore's history immensely. They would be screwed.
At that point, with the QBs in the 2019 draft, just looking at that real quick,
Is
the
that
number
Pickett
one, well,
or
2019 was
Burrow?
when they had Kyler and Daniel Jones, and then other quarterbacks taken were, I can't even find them. Dwayne Haskins, Drew Lock, Will Greer, Jared Stidham, Gardner Minshew. That's the
Okay, so
quarterback draft the year
one of
following.
those. Probably Drew Lock to the Ravens.
Yeah, which would not have worked. Unless if it's that 1 week, that 1 year, like we saw a couple weeks ago with him. And then if we go further out, 2020 was the Joe Burrow, Tua, and Herbert draft, which we can talk about that another time. But it's aged interestingly, I would say. Playoff football, though. What happens with playoffs, right? Narratives are built, legacies are made. Super Wildcard Weekend. We're here. We talked about it. We previewed this, and I felt like we did a pretty decent job. But some of these games, we could not have possibly seen the outcome that was foreseen in front of us, i.e., the Chargers and Texans game. Okay? We previewed this game, and we said the Texans are a dead corpse. They're practically dead. Somebody go out there and kill them. And then Justin Herbert played dead against the Texans, and therefore the Texans woke up and annihilated the Chargers. Justin Herbert throws 4 interceptions, completes less than half of his throws, and has one of the worst playoff games in NFL history, frankly said. Is that a fair assessment?
Yeah, that's a fair assessment. And I'm sick of people like Justin Herbert didn't have any receivers. Well, you had Lad McConkey. Let's see. CJ Stroud had Nico Collins. Who else does he have? John Mechie. I mean, cancer survivor John Mechie. Like, that's who we're throwing out over Quinton Johnson. Like, give me a break. Quinton Johnson's been better than John Mechie all season long. And then you also have other solid players on the Chargers this year. And you have been able to run the ball this year. Then, the offensive line wasn't good. Like, okay. Have you seen the Texans' offensive line the entire last half of the season where CJ Stroud is literally 1-2 in the ground, where he has to get rid of the ball or he's going to get in pile drived into the ground. He's going to get sacked. He's going to get hurried on every single play. Like, if anyone has a right to complain about not having a running game, not having an offensive line, not having wide receivers, like, you're talking about a guy in CJ Stroud who lost his two of his top 3 receivers, and now he has Nico Collins, and Nico Collins is a baller. We knew that, and Nico Collins elevated his game. He showed up and showed out, and then CJ Stroud proved that he is the anti-Dak Prescott. When it's the regular season, doesn't matter for him. No, sometimes he may look confused in the regular season. Sometimes it may not even look like he knows what he's doing in the regular season, but the Texans, I feel like, suffered from perpetual, we know we're going to fucking win our division and going to be in the playoffs this year. We don't have a shot at getting the number 3, 2, or 1 seed, so we're kind of settled in on being the 4 seed here. And it seemed like they kind of had a symptom of that this season, but like, CJ Stroud is the anti-Dak Prescott, because when it matters in the playoffs, suddenly this dude locked in and you look like an MVP quarterback. I'm like, what happened to the bad offensive line? What happened to someone who wasn't able to connect with Nico Collins? And then suddenly you have the same amount of connections you did the past 2 weeks with Nico, and he's running all over the Chargers. And then what happened to the Chargers defense? Like, this was supposed to be one of the best defenses in the league as far as total points, and then it looked like an old defense where, Joey Bosa was struggling a little bit in this game. Their secondary was struggling to stop one guy and Joe Mixon. And now the Texans are looking there like Joe Mixon turned back the clock. He looked like Joe Mixon from September of this year. CJ Stroud looked like the CJ Stroud of last season, and he proved like, oh no, even if I look like I'm struggling in the regular season, I will be there in the playoffs and I will be ready to ball out. And with the Chargers look ready for the playoffs at the end of the season. The Chargers look like they're setting themselves up for success. Completely flipped the script on the Chargers, and they heard all the noise. This is a bye week for the Chargers. Like, they're going up against the Texans, I believe, as Rex Ryan, who's talking about it as a bye week. I believe we're talking about it as a bye week. But also what they proved is DeMeco Ryan's defense, it's not a regular season defense. It's a playoff defense. Those guys showed up ready to hit hard. Alshire was all over the field. We already know he has an early case of CD. And those free agency acquisitions with Danielle Hunter, and now you have Will Anderson in that defense, that looked like a playoff defense. That's going to make it hard on a Kansas City Chiefs team that better not come out flat, because that defense could create some problems. But like, oh yeah, give me your excuses for 4 interceptions, because CJ Stroud has every excuse, and he didn't throw 4 interceptions. Like,
yeah. No, at this point, like, you want to talk about a legacy that's being formed before our very eyes. Justin Herbert, I've heard all year long, and I've heard it in other years as well. Brandon Staley's holding Justin Herbert back. The Chargers are holding him back. He has no receivers. He has no offensive line. He's carrying the team by himself. Now this is a chance where we can redefine what Justin Herbert is. He's not a top 5 quarterback, and he's a playoff choker at this point. The only other experience that we have of Justin Herbert in the playoffs is him blowing a 27-0 lead in a full half. They did nothing in the second half against the Jaguars, a defense that is not known to be excellent. A team that drafted Trayvon Walker because he had longer arms than Aiden Hutchinson. This is not the pillars of excellence for the Jaguars. And then in this game, he throws 4 picks. And of those, there's probably 3 of those that were just absolutely heinous, inaccurate, terrible balls. One of them, Will Dissly did throw into the cornerback, but it doesn't matter. Either way, when the Chargers needed Justin Herbert to make a big play, he either missed on the throw or he completely wet his pants. And for me, like, if our only exposure to you is a massive blown playoff lead and this 4 interception collapse, then Justin Herbert is not clutch. So I don't want to hear him compared. I don't want anybody to say that he's better than CJ Stroud, because CJ Stroud proved that he's a clutch performer. So I don't want to see him above him. I don't want to see him above Jaden Daniels, who just proved that he's a clutch dog in the playoffs as well. I don't want to see any of the big 4 that we've already talked about, Herbert, Allen, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Lamar Jackson. I don't even want to hear him mentioned in the conversation with those 4 guys. So at this point, like, is he a top 10 quarterback? Sure. But at this point, he's probably number 10 for me after what he's done. And I don't want to hear any more excuses for the guy. He's got to start winning in the playoffs, or he's just going to be another Phillip Rivers at this point.
Is he really a top 10 quarterback, though? I feel like we could come up with 10 quarterbacks better than him. So, like, number
Let's do it.
one, obviously Mahomes. Number
Right.
two, Lamar Jackson.
Yep.
Number three, Joe Burrow.
Yep.
Number four, Josh Allen, if you're feeling frisky. Number five, we can give that to Matthew Stafford because he's shown he can do it in the playoffs. He's won a Super Bowl. So, out of respect for Stafford, we can give it to him. Number six, I would put Jaden Daniels. Let's see here.
Jordan Love.
Jordan Love, you can put him there. Number seven. Number
Number 8.
8, you can put Jaden Daniels.
Well, we put Jen Daniels ready.
Yeah,
But
we
we
already
could
put
also
Jaden Daniels there.
some other people like maybe we put Jared Goff there. Maybe we put Jalen
Oh yeah,
Hurts there.
Jared Goff. No, Jared Goff definitely deserves to be there.
We could put
Baker Mayfield.
Baker Mayfield there at this point. And then at this point,
That's
like
9.
let's also can we also argue potentially? Oh, CJ Stroud. If we didn't mention CJ Stroud, we could put him there. And
We
then
did, yeah.
how about Bo Nix at this point? At my point, when I see Bo Nix, he's a lot more conservative. His approach is maybe a little different. But I see a guy that has similar talent to Justin Herbert and a guy that maybe doesn't get the same credit. I know he didn't win his playoff game against the Bills, but played better than Justin
How
Herbert.
about Brock Purdy?
And
about
Brock
Brock Purdy?
Purdy, who brought his team
How
to a
about
Super
Bryce
Bowl.
Young? I'll say it.
We'll see with him, but there's an argument now where he might not be a top 10 quarterback in the league, but they're paying him like he is. If you're going to show up in that performance, that was disgraceful. That was one of the worst playoff performances I've ever seen. And at this point, we can also argue, is he going to be in the same conversation as Andy Dalton? You want to know Andy Dalton's career stats in the playoffs? 1 touchdown, 6 picks, QBR of 57. Not a very clutch
He looked
performer.
like Andy Dalton did in those round 1 playoff games with Marvin Lewis. And, he has Jim Harbaugh there. But, my thing with Jim Harbaugh is I feel like a lot of people worship him. He knows how to draft, but he's older. He spent some time in college. I don't know. Does Jim Harbaugh have the magic answers for everything? But we named Mahomes, Burrow, Lamar, Josh Allen,
Jaden Daniels,
Jared Goff, Matthew Stafford, CJ Stroud, Jordan Love, Baker Mayfield, and
that's
Jaden
already
Daniels.
10. That's
10.
already 10.
10.
That's 10
right
quarterbacks.
there. And then you have some people could argue Dak Prescott because Dak Prescott has been more consistent at times than Justin Herbert.
Jalen Hurts.
I would rather Jalen Hurts. There you go. So he's number 12. He's number 12 or 13, maybe even 15 after next year with how Caleb Williams and Michael Penix could play. And if Ben Johnson gets Trevor Lawrence already beat him head-to-head in the playoffs, and he's shown that he's not a complete spaz in the playoffs. He's the one who came back and beat you head-to-head. That has to count for something. And then we're going to have a whole new draft class. So, Justin Herbert, not a top 10 quarterback.
No. Talent-wise, sure. But if you can't play in the playoffs, then I don't want to hear it. Texans move on. They're going to face the Chiefs. Good for them. And then talking about another team that crashed out this week, the Steelers, ending on a 5-game losing streak. You look at the stats, you go, oh, Russell Wilson played a great game. QBR of 120, 2 touchdowns, 270. But those numbers are lies. I just want to say it now. Those numbers are complete lies. They were down 21-0 at one point. Could not move the ball. Najee Harris, the legs on him, they ran out. Somebody oil up those engines because it's gone. But the Steelers, now they have lost, I believe I saw 7 consecutive playoff games. They have not won a playoff game since 2016 at this point. And again, ending the season on a 5-game losing streak, absolutely abused. Will they bring back Russell Wilson? Will they bring back Justin Fields? A lot more questions than answers after the Steelers lose yet again in the first round.
Yeah, they lose yet again in the first round. And people, I feel like 5 years ago, I was over this whole Mike Tomlin-ish. I was over this whole Mike Tomlin stick in Pittsburgh where he's this great motivator at head coach. He's a player's coach. He's good for your team, and he has a winning record each year. People act like you're crazy when you expect, if you're going to get to the playoffs every year, a playoff win, because the only other head coach to have that many winning seasons won 2 Super Bowls. Unlike Mike Tomlin. And Mike Tomlin, every time he got to the playoffs versus New England, completely outcoached, completely outclassed, which is completely ridiculous when you have Ben Roethlisberger and Antonio Brown in his prime And every time you went up against New England, you're like, against Tom Brady, the smartest quarterback to maybe ever play football of all time, outside of maybe Jaden Daniels, you're going to go out there and play zone defense, cover 3-4 front every single time, and then just stay stuck in your ways. Like, this coach doesn't make adjustments. He plays his defense, and it's a good defense, but when you get into the playoffs and people know what you're doing and you're unable to adapt and make adjustments, and your defense just still looks like it's from the mid 2000s and your offense still looks like it's from the mid 2000s, and you haven't really updated with the modern NFL, like, I don't know, like, people are always out here like, oh, is this year Mike Tomlin's gonna get fired? Like, is he gonna get it fired? No. But have I been saying this for like 5 years? Like, yes. And it's not because, I don't like Mike Tomlin. And sometimes it's just a coach runs their course in a place and has to leave. Like, he won a Super Bowl. That's great. Sean Payton moved on. People like Mike McCarthy have moved on. Andy Reid got to the Super Bowl and continuously got to the conference championship. He moved on. He went to Kansas City. Like, great head coaches move on, and sometimes you need a little bit of a wake-up call there, and sometimes you need a fresh start for your team as well here. So I feel like people take this super seriously, like, oh, is Mike Tomlin on the hot seat this year? Like, no, they just signed him to an extension, and really all the Steelers care about is getting to the playoffs. But like, if the Steelers front office really cared about winning in the playoffs, would they have kept Mike Tomlin over these past 2 years? Like, no, they wouldn't have. They would have looked for another head coach.
Well, the thing that's absurd about this is he's 3-9 in the playoffs since he won the Super Bowl, or at least made it to the AFC title game when they made the Super Bowl against I want to say it was the Packers that they faced. Yeah, they faced the Packers. Since then, there's been losses to Tim Tebow. There's been losses to Blake Bortles. There's been losses to, the list goes on with playoff meltdowns at this point. They haven't won a playoff game since 2016. And in that season, they got annihilated by the Patriots in the AFC title game. And it feels like since then, the Patriots almost broke the Steelers, because since then, they have not been the same team. They ended up missing the playoffs in 2018 and 2019. Granted, there were injuries there, but they've just been consistently 8-8, 9-7, 10-7, whatever it might be, just completely average since then. And like you mentioned, like, teams running their course. Look at what just happened with Bill Belichick. Bill Belichick won 6 Super Bowls with the Patriots, and then it got to a point where, okay, this team is just trending downwards, right? We're 10-7, we get blown out by the Bills in the playoffs, and then miss the playoffs. We start having losing seasons. It's like, okay, we've run our course. It's been 20 years with the Steelers, but this team has not been excellent with him since probably 2016, when they had Le'Veon and Antonio Brown and Big Ben in somewhat of his prime. So, like, it's over. It's been 8 years. You guys have done nothing in the playoffs. You've been 0-6 since then. Time to reboot. And now they probably won't. And obviously they're not going to. They haven't fired him or anything. But it's time. Or at least consider the time to change. It's been 20 years. It's time to move on.
Yeah. Doesn't it just feel like, Mike Tomlin is that guy who still has a PS2 who refuses to upgrade to the next generation console?
Yeah.
Like, bro, we're on the PS5 now. Like, you've missed like a decade of football. You haven't won a playoff game. You're 3-9, and you just refuse to make adjustments. And when you face the top quality competition in the playoffs, at least, you don't just lose. You don't just lose. You get absolutely annihilated. And for a guy who's never had a losing season, like, he wins like all of the games he should win, beats a really good contender once or twice throughout the regular season. They're like, okay, it's fine. We lost the series to the Steelers. We'll get to the playoffs and beat them. We're not really worried about them. And it's like, it's true. Like, he doesn't make adjustments in the playoffs. Like, it's a huge issue. And, if Sean McDermott was handed that Steelers team, do I think he could have got to the Super Bowl and won that year with that Steelers team with Ben Roethlisberger, now quickly becoming one of the most underrated quarterbacks of that era? Like, yes, I do. So it's like, do they have a lot of similarities? Like, yeah, I think so. I could see Sean McDermott also consistently having like winning seasons, maybe getting to a Super Bowl one year with the Bills and then them just not being successful in the playoffs after that. after getting to the Super Bowl once, winning, and then getting to the Super Bowl again.
Yeah, I think the big thing for me with Mike Tomlin also is the fact that there's been so much more noise in the Pittsburgh Steelers locker room than there's been success. I mean, I talked about since they made the Super Bowl against the Packers, they're 3-9 in the playoffs. But also in that time, we've had Antonio Brown and his fiasco, the Le'Veon Bell fiasco, the George Pickens fiasco, which seems like is occurring now, being late to the Christmas game, and all the other wide receivers that I miss in between, whether it's Deontay Johnson or whatnot. There are plenty of examples of the Steelers, whether people are playing like on live during the post game press conference, and all the other scandals that seem to be going on around Pittsburgh. Like, this is not a well buttoned up team, and it shows when this game against the Ravens, Derrick Henry rushes for 200 yards. Lamar Jackson says, how about I take another 100 off the top there? And Lamar Jackson has like basically a perfect game throwing the football. Their team gets absolutely obliterated. This Steelers team, by the way, defensively was supposed to be one of the best defenses entering the playoffs. And at this point, they get absolutely rolled by the greatest running back and quarterback duo maybe of all time when it's all said and done.
And how does TJ Watt go 367 consecutive snaps without a registered stat? How's that happen?
I don't know.
He's clearly injured. If you watched him every time he was on the sideline, he was grimacing. He was talking to the trainers. They were looking at him like TJ Watt. I don't know if this is just like growing up and then seeing like someone forgetting how fast the time flies, but like now you're also like looking at a situation like, did you just waste TJ Watt's prime? Because that's what it looks like.
Very possible. He's had a lot of injuries.
Yeah, he has, and I wouldn't be surprised. Like people jumped on like TJ Watt after that stat, like seeing 367 plays without registering a stat, and they're like, "Oh, see, he'll never be his older brother JJ." Like, what do you mean? He has better stats than JJ Watt. I don't understand. I feel like TJ has been more dominant than JJ. Am I crazy? Am I just biased because he's been my generation on my favorite team in the Steelers? Or do you think there is some argument where, because people seem to think that JJ Watt's a lot better than TJ is, but I feel like TJ has been more dominant at his peak and had more of an impact on his team.
Well, let's look at it. All right. So TJ Watt is a 7-time Pro Bowler, 4-time All Pro, and he's been Defensive Player of the Year once. But there's been plenty of instances where he should have maybe won. But nonetheless, he's got 108 career sacks and 330 total sacks. Sorry, total sacks. Am I right there? He's got 462 total sacks for his career. Keep in mind, he's played 8 years. TJ Watt played 12 when I give you these numbers. TJ Watt has 114 sacks. So by the end of next season, he should have more. And then 580 sacks. It's hard to say who is better. I mean, JJ Watt has 3 Defensive Player of the Years, 5 All Pros, 5 Pro Bowls. It's hard to say. I would still go TJ Watt, though, because I think TJ Watt was more dominant at his peak. But JJ Watt has had a longer career. So longevity-wise, maybe he takes the cake. But overall, yeah, I mean, both of these are Hall of Famers at the end of the day.
Yeah, but if we're talking impact, obviously it's Derek Watt.
Yeah, is that the fullback?
Yeah, the fullback, Derek Watt, Chargers and Steelers legend.
Yeah, San Diego and LA Charger legend. Let's not forget.
Yeah. And then, like, I'm so frustrated with the Steelers. We didn't even talk about the Ravens, but, like, the whole dialogue around the Ravens game was, what was more impressive? Was it the Bills win or the Ravens win? It's like, it doesn't matter. Because the Ravens were up 21-0 at halftime, and then they're like, all right, do you really think Russell Wilson and Arthur Smith's offense with Najee Harris and George Pickens, who is mentally checked out? You want to talk about a guy who didn't have receivers, and Russell Wilson, who's just struggling to survive out there, who look like, you know, you just dropped off someone from a nursing home at the VFW and said, have fun on bingo night. And then he just had no idea where he was or what he was doing. That's kind of exactly what Russell Wilson has looked like the past 5 games. And he's kind of regressed. He's just looked like an old version of Russell Wilson, which he was in that game. But the Ravens go out there. Derrick Henry dominates this game. He had over 155 rushing yards in the second quarter, and he's just the Iron Man who won't go away. Derrick Henry is a dominant playoff performer. You want to talk about quarterbacks who elevate their game in the playoffs? But how about running backs who elevate their game in the playoffs? And Derrick Henry, year in and year out, those playoff runs with Tennessee, him and AJ Brown carried them to a conference championship versus Kansas City. You don't think that Derrick Henry can carry them to another conference championship? Like, just pull up Derrick Henry's playoff numbers for
I did.
people who don't know how much of a monster he was.
So remember the year that he made it to the conference title game? You want to hear a stat about this? He has the record for 148 yards a game that year,
In the playoffs
446
or the
yards on
regular
83
season?
attempts, 2 touchdowns, and oh yeah, in the passing game, he also had a receiving touchdown. So that's insane. In his career, he's averaged 115 yards a game. He's averaged about a touchdown a game, and he's on pace to have 1,000 yards rushing by this next game that he has against the Bills. He's that guy. He's arguably the greatest running back in the playoffs ever. I can't think of anybody
Yeah.
else. I mean, maybe Marshawn, I would shout out. Adrian Peterson didn't have a lot of opportunities with the Vikings, but for sheer dominance, Derrick Henry is the greatest running back in the playoffs I've ever seen, and I'm sure you could say the same.
Oh, yeah, for sure. Outside of like maybe what we saw from Christian McCaffrey, but Derrick Henry is a stud. He's in his own class. He is the Adrian Peterson of this era, and he's really the only one. Like Saquon can hold a candle to Adrian Peterson. McCaffrey can, and Derrick Henry. Like those are the four horsemen when it comes to running back of the modern NFL era right now. And people are talking about like, oh, Josh Allen, Lamar Jackson, and it's such a tired dialogue. Like you're talking about two MVPs versus none. You're talking about someone who had more total touchdowns, more rushing yards, more passing yards, and a better QBR. Like it's not a conversation at this point, but people want to make this whole big deal. But the real conversation comes down to James Cook and Derrick Henry. It comes down to Dawson Knox and Mark Andrews. It comes down to Isaiah Likely and Dalton Kincaid. Like those are going to be the major factors in this game, and it's really going to be like Derrick Henry versus James Cook. But in this game, like Lamar was kind of just in the flow, and people were like, "Oh, the Ravens should have beat them worse." Like why? Like being up 21-0 and just coasting at halftime. Like why do we need to go hard the whole game?
I hate that argument for so many reasons. And this is just in general. Like they were up 21 nothing, they cruised, they're fine. They could have scored more, but at the end of the day, like they're on to Buffalo, they're going to win. As long as they have more points than the other team, they're still going to win and make it in the playoffs. Like a win's a win. I don't give a fuck about that. Who
It's
had a
not
better
college
game?
football.
Yeah, exactly. Now, who had a better game? I feel like they both had very similar games, and I can just confidently say they both had a great game. And this includes Josh Allen and Lamar. Josh Allen had 272, 2 touchdowns, no picks, rushed for about 50 yards. Lamar Jackson rushed, threw for 172, 2 touchdowns, and rushed for 80. Like, okay. In my mind, these guys both had excellent playoff games. They didn't choke, i.e., Justin Herbert or Sam Darnold. So they have that to worry about. Also, at the same time, are we going to congratulate them for winning a playoff game? These guys are the 2 and 3 best quarterbacks in the league. Maybe 2 and 4 if you want to put Burrow in there. But at this point, like, congratulations, you won. But when you guys face off, like, that's what really matters at the end of the day. Both of you guys played great, but that's not what we care about.
Yeah, no. Yeah, like you guys are both at least you both are top 5 quarterbacks at this point at worst. Like the expectation is to just win, and the Ravens went out there and dominated. Lamar Jackson had fun, but the Ravens were not worried about the Steelers in that game. They were toying with them, and John Harbaugh gets it done. Sean McDermott gets it done, and Denver came out, they had a touchdown the first drive of the game. I was like, okay, this is interesting. And then nothing else happened the rest of the game. It was like, honestly, for the Bills, I feel like, I don't know if it's just me, but I feel like I remember when the Bills were exciting to watch. Like, I don't know if it's just me this year, but it feels like the Bills are just very boring this year. And it's not like I don't enjoy the style of football that they play, but for the average fan, I feel like the average fan's going to look at Buffalo and be like, huh, what happened to like hold the ball for 20 seconds and look for Stephon Diggs and Gabe Davis down the field? Now it's just run it with James Cook, run it with James Cook. And they pretty much ran the ball every single time. And then when they started doing that versus Denver, I'm like, oh, Denver's fucked. because Josh Allen came out. He kind of looked like he was in the flow. The hair was going in this game. He had the Zins popped in. And then I was like, all right, let's see Josh Allen do something. And then he just kept handing the ball off. And Denver couldn't do anything about it. And it's a much different brand of football for Buffalo this year. And honestly, my criticism of Buffalo and my major problem with them over the past 2 years is you can't keep making Josh Allen carry the entire offense. You can't make him be the running game and the quarterback. Like before, he was the running back, quarterback, offensive coordinator when you had your terrible coordinator last year when you lost Brian Daboll. So it felt like Josh Allen was automatically put at a disadvantage. This year, it feels like they've actually leveled the playing field and they started implementing the system in the playoffs last year, which ended up really helping them, and it kept it a close game with the Chiefs. But I feel like Buffalo is just a lot more balanced, and they haven't reverted back to some of their Buffalo isms. So I'm curious to see how that will pan out as well versus Baltimore next week, because I feel like both of these teams are very dangerous, and I'm not going to be surprised if Buffalo wins next week, and I won't be surprised if Baltimore wins next week. I feel like just leveling the playing field with James Cook, him being a legitimate running back, I just wasn't sure. Just because when you have siblings who come into the NFL, usually one of them is worse than the other. But hey, James Cook went out there, got 18 touchdowns this year. Can you beat that? No. And he also dominated this game, and he was really the X factor for them. And people talk about Josh Allen. It's all about him and Lamar, but let's talk about James Cook. Let's talk about Derrick Henry, some of these other role players who are stepping up.
Yeah, and for Buffalo, like you mentioned, they're not playing the sexiest football. But what I notice is when I look at the box score, it's just filled with, anywhere between 6 and 10 guys getting the ball at least once. Like you get Matt Collins involved, you get Ty Johnson involved. Amari Cooper, we forget they traded for, but Amari Cooper is just a guy that at any point can connect with Josh Allen and have a huge play. But also, why not talk about Khalil Shakur, who I think is one of the more underrated receivers in the league. Like, he's been excellent. He hasn't been to the level of Vlad McConkey necessarily, but similar players, both smaller, both a little bit rugged type players, and he's been incredible. So I want to shout out Khalil Shakur. And then, Keon Coleman doing the best he can, but Buffalo isn't the sexiest Buffalo team we've seen. Obviously, the Stephon Diggs era was a lot more exciting, but if this team is just going to be efficient as fuck, which is what they are, then Buffalo could very well win the Super Bowl, which was by no means a hot take to you or I, but they could win it. They could beat Kansas City. They beat them earlier this year. They could beat the Ravens. They've beaten the Ravens before. So I wouldn't be surprised if either of these teams end up making the Super Bowl and winning it against any of the NFC teams.
Yeah, and the key word though is they can. The Ravens
Yes.
can, Buffalo can, and I know both of these teams can beat Kansas City, but doing it in Arrowhead off of a team that if they win next week versus the Houston Texans, look out because they're more well rested. And you don't think that this divisional matchup is going to be an absolute war next week, then you're sorely mistaken, because that game, Lamar and Josh Allen both have in the back of their minds that this is for number 2, baby. People will try and argue oh yeah, now this puts someone like Dan Orlovsky who's going to be see now Josh Allen, if he wins a Super Bowl, is on the same level as Mahomes. He's not. They'll try and say that with Lamar Jackson. He's not. But, they'll get the right to be in that conversation as the number 2 quarterback if they just even get to a Super Bowl. So it'll be a really interesting game. I'm excited to preview that. Last thoughts on Denver and how they played this year.
Look, I know the scoreboard shows that they got blown out, but for a team that moved off of Russell Wilson, who drafted a quarterback that I wasn't super high on entering the draft, the way that they performed this year, the fact that they made the playoffs, faced the Bills, and honestly in the first half gave them a lot of trouble. Credit to the Bills, and also credit to Bo Nix. I think we're going to see Bo Nix become the second best quarterback in that division next year, because it's certainly not going to be Justin Herbert after last game. Credit to the Broncos, honestly. They had a great season, and every time I thought that they were going to collapse throughout the season, they didn't. They were resilient. Sean Payton is leading a fine-tuned machine there. Their defense made a lot of great improvements as well, hit on a lot of draft picks. So if they can get another receiver for Bo Nix and get a genuine running back, maybe like an Ashton Ginty if they can get him, or a Cam Scatabo, this Broncos team is going to be a dangerous team, and it could be any of these AFC teams if they catch them by surprise.
Yeah, no, it can be any of these AFC teams. And then also for Bo Nix, I just want to say to Bo Nix, you're a crazy person. You're a madman. And he kind of reminds me as like the same build as Dricus Duplessis, who's a UFC fighter there. But dude, you played with 3 spinal fractures in a NFL playoff game. Anything spinal related, like I lift weights, you lift weights, like anything to do with like a spinal injury, like the idea with lifting weights is learning how to brace your core and then lift on like squats and deadlifts to make sure you don't fuck up your spine, because the idea of working out is just to protect that area. But like anytime like a spinal injury comes up, even just the slip disc, like that is a tough injury to go through. That is a painful injury to go through. Not only does it limit your mobility, limits his arm strength, explain some of the passes he was throwing. So I'm not usually one of those people when it comes to like injuries, like, oh yeah, if you're playing, you should, play through it and you're putting yourself open for criticism. Like, no, just the fact that you played there with 3 spinal fractures shows that you have way more heart than Justin Herbert did. And even though you only scored 7 points, I feel like gave me much more faith in Denver. And it was 10-10 at halftime. It had the potential to be, and you ended up missing a field goal if you're Denver, and you were able to contain Buffalo to a point where there are a lot of drives where Buffalo got in the red zone and Denver got a stop. So Denver feels like they're a team that's right there. They really just didn't have the offensive firepower to compete with Buffalo, but doesn't it feel like there were some drives where Denver forced Buffalo to leave a lot of points on the table?
For sure. There's plenty. I mean, entering the second half, I mean, they had 13 points halfway through the third quarter. Holding Buffalo with how great their offense has been all season, scoring, I think, 30 points in 9 consecutive games this year. Holding them to 13, and then I know obviously it ended up becoming the score that it was, but Broncos had their chances. They had that field goal that they missed, and there's a few others, a couple of opportunities that didn't go by their way, but this is by no means a game that they should feel unproud of. I feel like they played great overall.
Yeah, no, I feel like it was a good game for Denver. And then as far as like we had 2 teams in this division in the playoffs this year. Typically that doesn't happen again, especially we had 3 teams from that division make the playoffs. Doesn't usually happen. It happened last year with the AFC North, didn't happen again this year. Is there one of these teams is not like the other, or do you think Denver and Los Angeles can make it back to the playoffs next year?
I think both teams can make it back to the playoffs. It's going to come down to the offseason for the Chargers. If the Chargers roll back with just Lad McConkey and they don't address their wide receiver problems and they don't get T. Higgins, I'm not going to be as high on the Chargers. And the Broncos, I need them to get a nice running back in the draft. If they can get Cam Scatabo, I'm going to buy the Broncos stock immediately. So those are the 2 things. Broncos defense has played great. They can bolster that up pretty easily. Chargers, they can get a nice running back, another receiver. I'll be more high on the Chargers. I do think both of them can make it, simply because I feel like we're not going to see the Steelers back in the playoffs next year. We're going to probably see a Bengals team, hopefully, make the playoffs, or maybe a surprise team we don't know about. Patriots, maybe. Who knows?
Yeah, Jaguars, maybe if they get Benny Johnson. Team like that, Titans or Las Vegas could definitely come out of nowhere. So yeah, I feel like one of these teams is going to miss the playoffs. It'll be tough though, because it probably will come down to injuries. But Justin Herbert's been banged up before. But like my whole point was, Bo Nix had 3 spinal fractures here, and then if Justin Herbert has so much of a fingernail break, he's like, oh, I can't play today.
Yeah. Yeah, well, it'll be interesting to see how they pan out. Speaking of, okay, so we're talking about potential playoff teams that could come and take these guys' spots. Prime example of a team that could come out of nowhere and surprise everybody and turn things around. Commanders. Commanders and Bucks game, which is a good game to pivot to. Arguably the game of the week, although there are other games in contention. I think this was easily the most competitive.
It was the only competitive.
Yeah, Jaden Daniels, he comes in and he upsets the Bucks. First playoff game in 20 years. They win, and he plays excellent in this game. He's got 268, 2 touchdowns, and then he also rushes for a few. Gets a key first down to ice the clock and win off of a field goal. But Commanders upset the Bucks. Baker plays a great game. Can't get it done. Commanders. On to Detroit.
Yeah, no, they're on to Detroit, and this game really just hurt watching because I wanted both of these teams to win. It's such a good storyline, and like you sometimes find yourself where you don't really care who wins that game, but like this is one of those games I didn't want to end. I wanted it to go to overtime, and unfortunately, it really did come down to that fumble. And I've gone through like a lot of comment sections. I even put down like one like forum that like, hey, like Baker Mayfield, it was like a clip of him taking the blame for him. Like, yeah, kind of is on him because there was the fumble at the end of the game and it led to the touchdown. A lot of people get upset. They're like, what about this play? What about that play? Like, at the end of the day, as the quarterback, it is your job to take the blame. And Baker Mayfield did take the ownership for it. And maybe, it was a miscommunication with the receiver, but something wasn't right on that play and it ended up going south. And unfortunately for Baker, it ended up sending him home early, but I feel like that's nothing to be ashamed of for Tampa losing this game because you ended up losing to a team that's just as good as you, if not better. You had two pretty evenly matched head coaches in Dan Quinn and Todd Bowles here. They're kind of like the same level as far as a head coach. And then you just had two scrappy quarterbacks who go out there, lay it all on the line. And then for Washington, it was just their time in this game. It felt like Tampa Bay gave it everything they had, but Jamel Dean goes down. Tampa Bay's secondary got banged up in this game. And that's really what ended up breaking the game open for Washington is just too many injuries on Tampa's secondary because you have two of your top corners go down. Like, of course, Jane Daniels is just going to be able to pick up every single third down and then ice the game. And I feel like it really did come down to injuries in this game. And that's when it really opened up for the Commanders is when Jamel Dean left.
Yeah, 100%. This game to me, I think proves that Jaden Daniels, you have to put him in the top 10, but I honestly think I can comfortably put him in the top 5 at this point. We have our big 4, but Jaden Daniels has proven this year that he's a dog. I mean, whether it's a fourth quarter comeback against the Bears, against the Pack, whoever it might be. And then in this game, the nails that it took, the guts that it took for him, and how he played this game, he showed that he's a killer. And I feel like anybody who's going to be in a top 5 conversation has to be a killer. All the other 4 guys are a killer that we know. Joe Burrow, Josh Allen, Lamar, you get the idea. Patty Mahomes. Jaden Daniels is a killer. And I feel like, especially if he's able to upset Detroit next week, which I don't know if he will, but even if he plays outstanding in that game and doesn't win, this guy is next. And I think we could be having a conversation just like last year when we had, CJ Stroud and Bryce Young. One of them didn't play great. The second one was winning playoff games. Like we could have a conversation realistically where Jaden Daniels becomes this CJ Stroud figure, but better this upcoming draft. Like he's shown that he's got moxie. He's turned this Commanders team around. A team that's been kind of in the mud for the last 20 years. They're still having that stench of Dan Schneider in the locker room. Now they have the new owner here taking over. They have Dan Quinn changing the culture before our very eyes, and it's exciting to see. I'd like to see him continue to build on his success and play a great game against Detroit, but he showed that he's got guts, and I'm comfortable putting him. If he's not number 5, then he's maybe number 6. But overall, I think he's proven to be a top 5 quarterback in this league at this point.
Yeah, definitely. I feel a little uncomfortable with that. I can put him in the top 10, and he's won 5 straight one possession games. And we've seen guys struggle after their rookie year, but I would still give the nod to someone like Stafford and Jared Goff as of right now. But I definitely see where you're coming from. And Jaden Daniels is one of those guys who is a franchise killer. And what I mean with that is, a owner is going to look at Jaden Daniels and be like, well, he's really good in year one and he turned the franchise around in his first year. Why isn't Will Levis doing that? Why isn't Bryce Young doing that? Why didn't Dwayne Haskins do that? And then the list goes on. So, like, he's one of the players that makes it really tough and it gives other owners around the league's expectations that you can just draft a rookie and suddenly he'll turn your franchise around, where you've seen someone like Andrew Luck do that in a worse situation with Indianapolis where he can really just overcome a bad situation. Joe Burrow has done that with the Cincinnati Bengals here, where when he stepped in his second year after coming back from an injury, he led them to the Super Bowl and he led them head to head with Kansas City there. We've seen that with Jalen Hurts to a lesser degree, but he did get to a Super Bowl. So it's like he's one of those guys our owner will look at him and be like, wait a minute, this is taking too long, and then when you see a situation where once a guy like Baker Mayfield finds the right situation, that they can go out there and thrive there. But Jaden Daniels has been more than the Commanders have asked for. This is literally their best year since the 1980s, and they went out there and won one playoff game. So I'm excited for that game for Detroit, but again, I would have much rather seen the Commanders play the Rams or Philadelphia, because this is going to be another game where it's going to be sad to see the Lions or the Commanders lose with the Rams or the Eagles. Don't really care if either of those teams wins or goes home in that game.
I think what makes this game heartbreaking for me with the Bucks is this team. It felt like this was the better version of the Bucks than we saw last year, and this game, like with them losing, I see all these older players on the defense get older. Mike Evans is going to be a year older. Baker Mayfield will be a little bit older. Like, I don't think that their window is closed, especially with the how it stands in that division. However, it doesn't feel like their window is closing more than it's opening at this point because whether it's Levante David, whether it's Antoine Winfield or Vita Vea, all these guys are getting older now. These guys who had won the Super Bowl a few years back, they're all getting old. And there's big contract conversations that need to be had. Mike Evans could be there. Chris Godwin could very well be gone next year. Like, I still think they're going to be competitive in that division with the Falcons. But at the same time, like, we don't know. This team might not be the same team next year. We might see the last of this era of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers potentially to the level of exceptional play that they've had to this point.
It could be, but I do feel like I saw a lot of great young players in this game play exceptional. On their young defensive lineman, who's like their undersized 5'11" defensive tackle. This game was all over Jaden Daniels, and he had the play. He had Jaden Daniels in his arms, and then he just got away, and he could have held them to a field goal and given Baker Mayfield another shot with this game. But this game really came down to that one fumble there. But it was a game where it really came down to injuries for Tampa, and I feel like Tampa Bay has been good over the past at drafting. Like, this is the team that drafted Vita Vea. You got Shaquille Barrett on that team. You got Antoine Winfield Jr., Carlton Davis, Jamel Dean. You drafted Mike Evans. You drafted Chris Godwin. You just drafted Bucky Irving and had another really good draft this year. So honestly, Tampa's draft the past few years has actually given me hope that this team can succeed in the future, and I think they'll consistently be a playoff team with Baker Mayfield. Maybe not every year, but I do think like Atlanta, like we still have question marks there. How much better can Carolina get? And the Saints are a project, to say the least. So I still feel like Tampa Bay has a good shot at winning, because Baker Mayfield, when he needs to win a game, he typically rises to the occasion. This game, unfortunately, he had a turnover, but at the end of the day, hey, you did have a lot of injuries on your defense as well.
Yeah, I just mean like the old Bucks team, the defense that's been constructed, the Super Bowl team. All those guys
Yeah.
are getting older. There's going to be fresh blood in that organization. That doesn't always translate to success. And I feel like we'll see. I think they'll still be competitive in that division, but we could be seeing new blood soon enough.
Yeah.
Now, other playoff games. We've talked about this game. This game was the best. Any other things about this Bucks and Commanders game?
Yeah, Commanders, exceptional job this year. Can't wait for the Dan Bowl.
Yeah,
So I feel like that will be fun on Sunday here. But yeah, great season from Tampa Bay. Baker Mayfield, another exceptional season. I will say though, Baker had 42 touchdowns this year in the regular season. However, this game led the league in fumbles, fumbled the ball in this game, and he had, I believe, 16 interceptions. So he ended up leading the league in turnovers, which is, we've been critical about with Josh Allen about that. We've been critical about Daniel Jones and Eli Manning there. It's like, if Baker Mayfield cuts the turnovers next season, and that's something he really works on as far as like just taking care of the interceptions and fumbling issues, that's something that would help this team excel tremendously next year. If he just cut the turnovers, that turns a 9-8 season into 11-6 or 12-5.
yeah, that's true. Well, you know what? It didn't help in this Eagles and Packers game. 3 interceptions for Jordan Love. Didn't play quite as bad as Justin Herbert, but QBR of 41, 3 interceptions, 212 yards, 10 points for the Green Bay Packers. even with Josh Jacobs doing the best he possibly can, Eagles shut them down. Eagles have a great defense, so it's not too much of a surprise. They played great. Reed Blankenship, Nolan Smith, and the Kobe Dean. You get the idea. But Eagles take care of business. Saquon runs all over them. We have Christian Watson get banged up before this game, and then not one but two of their receivers go down for the Packers. Felt like they
Yeah.
kind of lost their
Offensive
swagger.
linemen too.
Yeah, offensive linemen too. It feels like their swagger was all but dead, but give credit to the Eagles for the win. But yeah, this just didn't feel like this was ever going to be the Packers game after those losses there.
Honestly, watching this game though, it felt like the Packers were really about to take over the game. Like certain points really felt like they should have taken it over, and it's unfortunate that you have that one drive at the beginning of the game was really the difference because you end the half 10-3 in this game. It could have been easily 3-3 in this game because the Packers defense held down the Philadelphia Eagles. Really, the only touchdown you gave up in the first half was because of that special teams error. But like, I heard like people giving Justin Herbert excuses because he doesn't have receivers or offensive line. But like, honestly, Jordan Love had his top three wide receivers get injured, and then also had a starting offensive lineman get injured on like the first offensive play of the game, and Jordan Love had some turnovers and he had some forced errors in this game. Yes. And he had three interceptions, but this felt like a game that the Packers could have won. And this didn't feel like a game where it's like I'm completely selling my stock on Jordan Love than a lot of other people have in the past because it didn't really feel like a choke job in this game. It just felt like you have three receivers who got injured. I mean, Josh Jacobs also got injured on the last play, and then he was limping around the sideline, and then he was out. It's like his starting running back gets hurt. His two starting receivers, so it's just Dontavian Wicks is the only guy we have. Our only hope is Dontavian Wicks, and then one of our starting offensive linemen gets hurt. So I feel like the criticism of Jordan Love in this game, while some of it is fair, where he could have settled for a check down here, I feel like this was still a game that Philadelphia really shouldn't feel good about necessarily. I mean, Saquon Barkley, and they start to turn it up in the second half, but like if you don't get that fumble on the first play of the game, you could have very well have lost this one because does the offensive lineman get hurt in this game? Then you go to all the other alternate scenarios on how it changes the game. But like I felt like this was still a game that Green Bay just let slip away. And I feel like this was a game that Green Bay lost and the Philadelphia Eagles didn't necessarily win.
Yeah, I can agree. First of all, the Eagles had not one, not two, but three 30-yard field goals in this game. So red zone efficiency did not exist for the Eagles in this game. I understand Jahan Dotson and Dallas Goddard. Dallas Goddard, by the way, had the nastiest stiff arm in this game. Want to highlight that. But for me, like when I look at this box score, right, Jalen Hurts had 130 yards passing, did basically nothing. And then, Saquon Barkley does his thing, which is great. But for me, like, their defense was exceptional, which we knew that already. For me, it's like their offense, if you remove Saquon from this scenario, didn't really do a whole lot. They didn't do well in the red zone. They didn't convert well on third down. I'll get the third down numbers here because it wasn't excellent for them. They're 2-11 on third down with a team that has Saquon Barkley, arguably the best running back in football right now, MVP candidate. You have Jalen Hurts, who was an MVP candidate a few years ago, and you have A.J. Brown, arguably a top 5 wide receiver, and then Devontae Smith, who's no slouch either. You were 2-11 on third down. That's disgraceful. You had less total yards than the Packers, who everything you mentioned here, their entire offense collapsed basically via injury. So now, like, it's good that the Eagles won. I'm not going to discredit them for winning. However, this is by no means the best Eagles team I've seen. And I still don't believe in them. I still feel like the Rams are going to give them trouble next week. So I'm not optimistic about the Eagles after this game. Like, you won because the Packers fell apart. But as you mentioned here, I felt like the Packers at any point could have just scored a touchdown, and that game would have been in a sweating distance at that point.
Yeah. Yeah, this is like one of those games too. It's just like you feel like Philadelphia tried to give the game over, and then also like can we talk about the book thing? Like everyone was freaking out about the book, and I see people are like, "How could AJ Brown do this on the sideline?" Like, who cares? He did it as a joke because he knew the camera was on me. He's like, "Let me make fun of LeBron James and pull out a book and pretend I'm reading." Like, that's all that was. Like, it was just a joke on the sideline. So when AJ Brown is being talking about Jalen Hurts and there's a rip there, then suddenly he's being toxic to the team. But when he's being lighthearted and making a joke on the sideline and being funny, then suddenly that's an issue for the team. Like,
Yeah,
really?
make up
Why
your
is
mind.
this book thing even a story? Like, oh, funny. He pulled out a book. Like, I didn't think anything of it. And then people are like, can you believe that AJ Brown pulled out a book on the sideline? That's like,
Yeah, it's so weird because at one point everyone's talking about the Eagles being the favorites in the NFC, and then the second breath they're trying to divide. It feels like with this whole book thing, nobody cares. Like the book sales from this after the event was up 5 million% after he did that. So help somebody out with that book sale. But it was just a meme.
really?
Like it was just funny. Yeah, the book sale numbers are up 5 million% from there after he
What book?
highlights that. It was like a self-improvement book, but the self-improvement sales have skyrocketed since then. Buying that book. Yeah, I don't know. Interesting enough. But yeah, I mean, it feels like the media is just making a problem out of it. It doesn't matter all that much in my mind.
Yeah, no, it really doesn't. And it's just weird with Philadelphia because you do make a great point. On one point, you have someone like Chris Sims, like during the middle of the season, he's like, clearly, like, if Philadelphia gets into the playoffs and they keep rolling, they're the number one contender and going to get to the Super Bowl. You have someone like Colin Cowherd saying that Philadelphia is his Super Bowl favorite at this point. You have all these, big media personalities talking about them. And then in the very same breath, they'll be like, Nick Sirianni's unqualified. They're a team without a coach. There's too much drama with AJ Brown. Like, okay, are they the Super Bowl favorite or is the team that believes in their coach the most would run through a wall for them? The team that loves their quarterback and is on the exact same page every single play and is one of the most motivated teams in Detroit, are they the favorite for the Super Bowl? So it's like I really don't understand like that bipolar relationship that the media has with Philadelphia because like Philadelphia looked beatable in this game. People are talking about Baltimore because they're just comparing Buffalo and Baltimore because you can't have a take about either team without comparing the two. But like with Philadelphia, I was like, okay, what happens when you have someone like Stafford and Sean McVay who's actually savvy go up against the Philadelphia Eagles? Like, I feel like that's going to be a problem. And then if we get a conference championship of Detroit, LA, like I just don't it feels too easy for it to just be Philadelphia and Detroit. Like there's usually a wrinkle thrown in there somewhere. Maybe it's Washington and I feel like it's either going to be Washington and Philadelphia as much as it would break my heart or it's going to be Detroit and LA. But it just doesn't really make sense to have Philadelphia go to Detroit just to
Yeah,
lose.
yeah. And I mean, for the viewers watching, I mean, you'll see tomorrow what I feel. I feel pretty confident. A good game to pivot to would be the Rams and Vikings game, the last game of the week. But I don't trust the Eagles all that much. Something feels like it's in the air. Jalen Hurts has done the bare minimum to win football games, it feels like this year, throwing for under 200 yards in how many consecutive games was it? 9 consecutive games that he threw under
He's just like
250
us,
yards. Yeah, just
doing
like
the bare
us.
minimum at his job.
Yeah. Hey, you know what? Respect the game. If I could get paid $60 million to do the bare minimum, I would do the same. But the Rams, they completely killed the Vikings on Monday Night Football. Not only did they kill the Vikings, they also killed Sam Darnold's bank account, which I think is maybe the worst crime you could possibly do. It's like robbing a bank. JP Morgan Chase, dare I say. And you just completely heisted this man out of hundreds of millions of dollars. You sacked him 9 times. Jared Verse had a monster game. And on the other side of the ball, we had Kyron Williams get involved. We had Tyler Higbee get involved. Puka Nacua. Rams just annihilated them, had control throughout the entire game. I believe they had 40 minutes of time of possession as well. Just hogged the clock the whole time. And then for the Vikings, a team that at one point was looking at the 1 seed, Super Bowl aspirations. The Lions break them in week 18. They have to play on the road against the Rams. And then the Rams, not even in their home stadium, they go to their rivals' stadium and beat them after all the things going on in LA with the fires. Prior to everybody going on, down there. But they beat them, they dominate them, and now at this point, the Vikings have a really tough decision. Are they going to keep Sam Darnold, or are they going to move forward with JJ McCarthy? This is not a very easy question to answer at this point.
Oh, it's definitely an easy question to answer. I mean, you have your two biggest games in back-to-back weeks, and Sam Darnold throws one touchdown. Okay, problem solved. You have your answer. If you have a guy who is going to crumble under the pressure here, like, I'm sorry, Sam Darnold is not worth $50 million. He's not worth $60 million. He's maybe in that 25 to $35 million range. But if you're Minnesota, you're not going to get over Detroit in the same division ever with Sam Darnold on your team. And then if Brian Flores leaves and somehow swoops in and steals one of these head coaching opportunities, your defense could suffer as well here. And, Kevin O'Connell has been a great head coach here, but he's been one of those head coaches, gotten to the playoff twice now. Now he's lost to Daniel Jones in the first round with Kirk Cousins. And he went 14-3, was a game away from the 1 seed, and then they have the worst possible performance where the defense completely disappears. But how could you not help from disappearing when your offense completely gets destroyed? And it's not like, we didn't see this coming with Sam Darnold, but like the fact that people were saying, yeah, this guy has earned 50 to $60 million, and then his biggest cheerleader, Colin Cowherd, just went out there and said, like, guys, don't worry about Sam Darnold. He'll be fine. Like, what do you mean he'll be fine? Sam Darnold said himself after the game, he's like, I had a great season, but the only thing that matters is what happens in the playoffs, and I didn't play well. It's like, he's literally telling you, like, I can't do this. You had Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Aaron Jones, and TJ Hawkinson. What more can you give the guy? Oh, yeah, Jordan Naylor's played well this year. And it wasn't because he didn't have open wide receivers. There were plenty of times where Peyton and Eli were like, look, Jordan Naylor was open on this cross from a wide receiver. Oh, look, Bill Belichick was also saying, like, there's been plenty of times where he just hasn't gotten Justin Jefferson the ball when he's had an advantage in a matchup, and sometimes you just need to put the ball up there. It's like, you had 35 touchdowns. That's a good season, but it's also one season. You do not pay someone like Sam Darnold until he proves he can do this in at least back-to-back years. Why would you handicap your future with Minnesota? If you're a franchise and you want to be successful, you want to get to a Super Bowl, you have to be able to say, even though you had a great season, no. You have to be able to be, able to say no in a situation where maybe you're in a relationship, maybe you're at a job and the job works for you, but it's not a job that you should be at and is holding you back in your career. You need to be like, this is great here, but I need to move on to really unlock my full potential. See you later. Like, Sam Darnold is never going to bring you to that Super Bowl level. And if you're fine getting to the playoffs every year and losing, maybe you get to a divisional round and getting bounced, like, you're just never going to get it done with him. And he's not worth handicapping your franchise where we couldn't sign that corner. We couldn't sign that lineman. We couldn't re-sign Jordan Addison. We couldn't re-sign Hawk again. We couldn't bring in a running back. We couldn't get that pass rusher that we need. Like, Sam Darnold is just not worth it. And you have to be able to say no if you want to be successful.
I think also the last moment in my mind here is Sam Darnold playing like garbage against the Lions. I mean, he completed 40% of his passes against the Lions in that game. And then in this game, he gets pressured. He holds the ball way too long, and they completely collapse. For a Vikings team who has made 4 Super Bowls and has won 0, consistently comes up short, consistently lets their team down, and consistently chokes when the big moments occur, this is an opportunity for you. There's a franchise that's very similar to you that had a situation, and they moved on from it. They had Tyrod Taylor in 2017, and the Bills moved on. After he won them their first playoff game in 20 years, they went out and they drafted Josh Allen. They moved on from Tyrod Taylor. He ended up going to the Browns. And then they got their franchise quarterback that they're going to have for the next 20 years, hopefully. The Bills, granted, the Bills have not won a Super Bowl yet, but they're in the bubble where they can. The Vikings, they stay with Sam Darnold. We all know that Sam Darnold is never going to win you a Super Bowl. We know that maybe at best he can bring you to an NFC title game. That's like his ceiling at this point. He's no better than like a Case Keenum in that case, or Nick Foles, although I do think he's better than both at his best.
What? Super Bowl champion Nick Foles? Come on. Nick Foles at least had
don't defend Nick Foles.
More than
Sam Darnold. No,
he had more
I
than
don't
one
hear
good
it.
season.
Hey, my turn, please. So the Vikings have an opportunity where they've been perpetual chokers for 60 years. Is this their opportunity where they can finally erase and say, no, it's great what we have with Sam Darnold. We're 14-3. Let's move on. We have JJ McCarthy. Maybe he's the future for us. Maybe he's the guy. And if he's not, move on and start fresh. Repaint the Minnesota Vikings from perpetual chokers and letting their fans down to prosperity in the NFL, like what we saw with the Bills, even though they haven't won a Super Bowl. Good example of a team that moved on after seeing success.
Yeah. Yeah, but like saying he's better than Nick Foles is crazy because all you need to know is just the look in their eyes in the playoffs where Sam Darnold looks petrified, looks like a deer in the headlights. He had that entire look, he looked like Joe Biden when he saw the Easter bunny. The entire game versus the Lions and the entire game versus the Rams, he looked panicked, but like Nick Foles like went out there and won a Super Bowl and then also won another playoff game in the previous year. Like maybe he hasn't had a regular season as good as this year, but like
That's what I was
I feel
talking
like
about.
saying he's yeah.
I was talking about like skill wise. I think he's better than Nick Foles. He played better this season. Like playoff wise, yeah, no, like Nick Foles is that guy. But I mean, he threw for 4,400 yards. He had 35 touchdowns. I think he's a better player than Nick Foles was.
Yeah, for sure. And I feel like the point is still like you're not paying either of them. Like the Eagles like won a Super Bowl with Nick Foles, still didn't pay him. They paid Carson Wentz.
Yeah, and they made the right choice, even though it didn't pan out with Carson Wentz. But Sam Darnold at this point, like the Raiders, maybe take a shot on him. Maybe the Jets, if they're really desperate, bring back Sam Darnold. But the opportunities he has outside of Minnesota are not exceptional. You have maybe like the Titans. You can be the bridge quarterback. At this point, he's like the best possible bridge quarterback option you have for any of these teams. But he's not your answer, unless if you're just okay with being a wild card team that gets bounced in the first round.
Yeah, and the thing is he had like every possible weapon he could have this year where you have the best wide receiver trio you could have with Addison, Jefferson, and Naylor. You have one of the best pass catching tight ends you could have with Hawkinson. Then you still have Aaron Jones and Cam Akers there, and Cam Akers played well at the end of the year, and Aaron Jones played well throughout the year. So it's like, you can blame the offensive line, but at the end of the day, it's like you either have it or you don't in those playoff moments. And Sam Darnold looked terrified.
I mean, we've talked about Justin Herbert this game and how he looked against the Texans compared to the opposite end with CJ Stroud, a guy who I think is shown to be a playoff performer. He's played well in these two playoff runs that he's had. Patrick Mahomes, we see what kind of a different beast he is in the playoffs. Like all of these guys that we're talking about that are playoff performers, Baker Mayfield, playoff performer, Jaden Daniels, playoff performer. Like
Yeah.
Sam Darnold, the way he crashed out, would I be surprised if we see this again? Absolutely not. In fact, I would expect it to happen with him. And I'm sure we'll see it again at some point.
Yeah. This is a tough decision, but I feel like I would rather just see what we have with JJ McCarthy first next year. But for the Rams, though, Sean McVay, great head coach, knows what he's doing, but dude is a monster. And if you're a running back, I don't know if the Rams, like, you'll have great numbers there, but again, Kyron Williams has the number one usage rate of any offensive player in the league this year, where he touches the ball on at least, I believe it was 31% of the Rams plays. Like, you want to talk about a guy who grinds people's knees to the bones where you're not going to have any ACLs or MCLs left once he's done with you? Like, Sean McVay is kind of a monster at this point. Like, he knows what he's doing. He can coach a good offense, but look at what he did with Todd Gurley. And then now he's doing, to a lesser degree, the exact same thing with Kyron Williams. Like, okay, we're just going to give you the ball 30% of the time when we already have Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua. And, given those guys were hurt earlier this season, but he still has the highest usage rate in the NFL for not Derrick Henry, not Saquon Barkley, but not even Cooper Kupp or Puka Nacua, but Kyron Williams.
I know. I saw that. I thought that was funny. Yeah, Sean McVay, I mean, this game showed his coaching props as well. I mean, I don't know if I could say he outcoached. Like, I think Kevin O'Connell necessarily didn't have a horrible game. I think Sam Darnold kind of ruined it for him. But Sean McVay, I mean, the fact that this team had just lost Aaron Donald, they went out, they drafted Jared Verse with their first round pick since 2016, ends up being this guy who's turned into a total monster. And then the team that's just been able to build around him since the Super Bowl, this Rams team's scary. Matt Stafford can turn back the clock like he did in this game. He's got the weapons involved. Tyler Higbee, Puka Nacua, Cooper Kupp. Cooper Kupp barely did anything, and he still panned out. I think this Rams team could upset either of the two other teams or any of the other three teams remaining in this playoff run. They could make the Super Bowl. I don't think they will ultimately. I think Detroit will beat them. However, I think the Rams are well in position to beat the Eagles, and I'll talk about it more tomorrow, but this team is scary. Their defense has played really well. Their offense is a hard team to game plan for. I think this team is set up for an NFC title game.
That would be crazy though if they won the Super Bowl this year and the Chiefs didn't make it, because then Sam Darnold would single-handedly be protecting Patrick Mahomes' legacy in a way, because that would have meant he would have stopped Burrow from winning a Super Bowl and probably Allen or Lamar from winning a Super Bowl if Mahomes doesn't make it, which would be an interesting narrative.
Yeah, you're saying with Sam Darnold?
No, if Stafford makes the Super Bowl this year and wins it against Josh Allen or Lamar, then he's single-handedly saving Patrick Mahomes' legacy, because neither Josh Allen or Lamar would have a Super Bowl. Stafford's never going to be in that conversation because he's kind of from an era before that. So we're really comparing him against Roethlisberger, Aaron Rodgers, Drew Brees, Tom Brady, those guys, not the modern era. But like, say he beats Josh Allen or Lamar, then he would have stopped Burrow from winning a Super Bowl and being in the conversation for number one quarterback, and then stopped Lamar or Allen, who would probably have had to beat Mahomes to get to the Super Bowl. Then he would have kind of been protecting their legacy as well. And then after that, people will have the revisionist history of, oh, well, Stafford was better than Drew Brees and Aaron Rodgers.
Yeah, that's super true. I mean, if he wins 2 Super Bowls, I mean, where does that put him? Does he put him above Drew Brees? Like, legacy-wise, you have 2 Super Bowls, you're in a very elite class of NFL quarterback. Nobody's going to put him over Peyton Manning. No one's going to put him over Brady. But everybody else I think it's fair game. You could put him over Aaron Rodgers, technically. I think Aaron Rodgers was better at his peak, but he didn't do shit in the playoffs more often than not. Where does Matt Stafford rank? I mean, that's a conversation that we're going to have when he retires.
Yeah, and I feel like the two that people always put up there are Manning and Brady, and then it's always between like who is the best. People debate who's the best out of Roethlisberger, Rodgers, and Brees. There, like personally, like Roethlisberger won 2 Super Bowls and got to 3, which is 3 times as many that Rodgers and Brees got to. So I would put him number 1 just with the type of games he can have. But like with that, like Stafford could have a legitimate case to be one of the best quarterbacks of that era, because everyone who talks about him says he was the Mahomes before Mahomes, where he could just make every single throw and make it look easy, where he was also one of the most talented throwers of the football, but he was just sitting out in Detroit in one of the worst eras under Jim Schwartz.
Yeah, I mean, they got him after their 0-16 season. And yeah, they got a Megatron and a few other players, but for the most part, that team has been historically pathetic. But now, thank God they've restored the roar. But Rams, Matt Stafford, could they win a Super Bowl? Absolutely. Be interesting to see. But Super Wildcard weekend, we had a Justin Herbert crash out. We had a bad game from Jordan Love, Sam Darnold. We had a historic Bucs-Commanders game. Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen did their things. And we'll be here to preview the divisional round this upcoming day on Wednesday. But we have one more thing to do before this show concludes. We must talk about the worst, the abysmal, the pathetic, downright disgraceful, worst top 5 according to the Brickyard. I'm releasing my documents here, and I have them all here and handy. But first, I must give an honorable mention to anybody in the way: defensive lineman, edge rusher, linebacker, corner, safety, in the way of the 2024 free agent running back class. Yes, Derrick Henry, 186 yards. Bye-bye, Titans. You lost out on the greatest running back of our time. Josh Jacobs, bye-bye, Raiders, 84 yards. Although it wasn't a losing effort, played a great game. Saquon Barkley, MVP candidate, 119 yards. Bye-bye, Giants. You snooze, you lose. And then, hell, even Joe Mixon. I know he wasn't a free agent, but they traded him away, the Bengals did, and he rushed for 106 yards in this game. So, honorable mention is the Titans, the Raiders, the Giants, and Bengals for all moving on from top running backs. And look at where you all are on now. Watching them do great on your couch as they play in the playoffs. At number 5, I have, hold on, wait. I have, hold on, wait a minute here. I have Zane Gonzalez's hair. What is wrong with his hair? Why was it so messy when it came down to this clutch kick? We're waiting for what potentially could frame the legacies of Baker Mayfield and Jaden Daniels. And meanwhile, this motherfucker's combing through his hair like he's got a date then following up. Zane Gonzalez's hair is at number 5. At number 4, when this player came onto the scene, I couldn't help but fall in love with this player. And many people told me, if you're going to see success in the NFL, all you need is love. But some people say they've had it with these silly love songs. Here I am, Jordan Love at number 4. Jordan Love. I mean, I would do anything for love, but I won't do that. This love has become tainted. And at this point, with how bad he played, love stinks. But ultimately, I will always love you, Jordan Love. Bad game, 3 interceptions. Did not play exceptional, but honestly, I think he'll bounce back. He'll play just fine. At number 3, I have the Pittsburgh Steelers. Between Russell Wilson and his fake stats that we have in these postseason games, whether it's Mike Tomlin losing 6 consecutive playoff games, being 3-9 since making the Super Bowl against the Packers, having as many playoff wins since 2016 as Daniel Jones, I'm tired of the Steelers. I'm tired of Mike Tomlin, and I'm tired of the Guantanamo Bay Steelers that are. Therefore, they are at number 3. At number 2, we went from a top 5 quarterback, arguably, to a confirmed perpetual playoff choker in Justin Herbert. We talked about it. Whether it's the media or whether it's ourselves, we said, well, he's got top 5 talent. He's got a big arm. He's on a Chargers team. He finally got his head coach. Brandon Staley's done in his way. Turns out the only thing in his way was himself. 4 interceptions. Completed less than 50% of his passes. Completely melted down against a Texans team that looked like the dead corpse that was a Texan at one point. Justin Herbert, whether it's that 27-0 blown lead that we have in the back of our minds from his last playoff appearance, now we have a 4 interception game. He's turning into this generation's Andy Dalton at this point. Will he ever get over the hump? We don't know, but he's eventually become the wild card sacrifice at this point if he keeps on the projection he's on. But nobody has had a worse super wild card weekend than the late, great Sam Darnold. Bad day to be a paranormal denier. That's right. The kid who sees ghosts. Kanye and Kid Cudi, where are you? 9 sacks in this game. Gets absolutely obliterated. And not only that, loses out on so many zeros in his bank account. This guy was projected potentially up to $200 million. $50 million annually. And now at this point, will he get a 1-year deal? Will he get a 2-year deal? Hell, maybe he won't even get a 3-year deal at this point. The paranormal deniers are in absolute shambles. Bad day to hate ghosts. Sam Darnold, it's all he could see on the field against the Rams this past weekend. Worst top 5 at number 1. Poor Sam Darnold.
It was funny. You sent me that, and I went to check something, and I was like, I didn't get it until the next day later because you sent me Kids See Ghosts. And then I checked, I didn't get that joke until the next day. I was like, of course, it was Sam Darnold.
Oh, yeah, of course. The man who sees ghosts. Ghostbusters no more.
Yeah, no, that was a crazy game, crazy weekend of football, really having only one competitive game. Hopefully it's more competitive next weekend. I feel like pretty much all but one of the games will be a barn burner, but you never know with Houston. Maybe they'll show up and surprise us. But yeah, I am ready for the divisional round of football. I think this is going to be exciting. But yeah, it's bittersweet because we have the playoffs here, but that just means we only have 3 more weeks of football. And no, the Pro Bowl doesn't count.
Yeah, we got divisional round. We'll have legacies on the line, conference championships, and then the great Super Bowl, who will be immortalized this season of the best in the NFL history books. It's going to be interesting to see. Once when this season concludes, many things to discuss as well, but we're here to break it all down. We're here to talk about everybody's legacy and each game that prevails. We're here to talk about it tomorrow when we preview these games, but most importantly of all, stay brick.
Stay brick.